The year was 1865, and the high country lay gripped in iron winter. The mountains were white giants, their shoulders buried in snow, their ridges knife-sharp against a hard gray sky. For miles, nothing stirred but the wind and the beasts that thrived in silence. It was a place men avoided if they valued warmth, laughter, or life itself. But for Jonas Clay, it was home. He moved through the drifts with the slow, deliberate gait of a man who had long ago married himself to hardship. His boots were cracked rawhide, the seams patched more times than he could count. The rifle balanced in his hands was older than some of the men who had gone off to die in the war, its walnut stock darkened by oil, sweat, and blood. His beard was heavy with frost, his eyes narrowed against the sting of the wind. For 30 winters he had walked this same trail to his trap lines, and for 30 winters he had spoken to no man longer than a trade for powder or salt. The wolves knew him. He heard them at night, pacing in the timber, circling his small cabin like priests around a grave. He envied them, sometimes their company, their simple law of pack and fong, but he was not of their kind. He was something else, a man cut loose from the world, too stubborn to die, too broken to live among people. Once he had worn the blue of a scout, his eyes sharp, his body quick. He had guided columns of weary soldiers through hostile valleys, warning them of ambush, marking the land for men who cared nothing for it. He had seen enough blood to dye a river, and when the war spat him back out, lean and ragged, he returned to a wife too tired from worry, a son too small to understand. Then came cholera, creeping like smoke through his settlement. In a single week the fever took them both, and Jonas dug 2 graves with his own hands. He stood over the mounds, hat pressed his chest, and swore he would bury himself alongside them in spirit, if not in flesh. He walked into the mountains the next day, and never walked back out. The cabin he built squatted in a pine hollow, its logs blackened with age, roof heavy with snow. Smoke drifted from a stone chimney, and a rack of elk hide stiffened in the frost outside. Inside it was one room, stove, bunk, table, shelves lined with jars of dried beans and strips of venison. A man's world, bare and practical, with no room for softness. Jonas preferred it that way. Softness made a man weak. Weakness got him killed. But loneliness, that was another thing entirely. He would never admit it, not even to the darkness that wrapped him each night. Still, there were hours, long, cold hours, when the silence pressed too heavy, when he found himself listening for footsteps that would never come. Sometimes, in the crackle of the fire, he imagined the sound of a child's laughter. That was when he drank the hardest, pouring whiskey down his throat until the ghosts blurred into nothing. The day the women came began like any other. Jonas rose before dawn, broke the ice in his water bucket with the butt of his knife, and washed his face in the biting chill. He pulled on his worn coat, took up his rifle, and trudged into the timber to check the traps. By noon he had 2 rabbits swinging from his belt, and a fox hide rolled under his arm. Snow fell steady, the sky dimming as clouds thickened. He hurried home, knowing storms here were less forgiving than bullets. By dusk the wind howled, rattling his cabin walls. Jonas stacked more logs onto the fire and watched the flames lick higher. He sat at his table, knife in hand, carving thin strips of wood for snares, when a sound cut through the storm, a faint cry, like wind given voice. His head lifted. He stilled, listening. Again it came. Not a wolf. Not the creak of trees. A human sound. Jonas rose, muscles tensed, and reached for his rifle. He eased the door open. Snow gusted in, stinging his face. Shapes moved in the whiteness, tall, lean, wavering. 6 of them. He brought the rifle to his shoulder. His breath fogged the air, steady despite the jolt in his chest. Whoever they were trespassing on the one place left to him, and he had no mind to share it. The figures came closer, resolving into people, women. Their hair hung long and matted, their dresses torn by travel and frost. Blankets clung to their shoulders, stiff with ice. Their eyes burned dark, in faces hollow with hunger. They stopped a dozen paces away, snow swirling between them and the cabin. Jonas barked, "That's far enough." They didn't answer, only stood, breath heaving, their gazes locked on him. The leader, he guessed she was the leader by the set of her chin, stepped forward. She was tall, proud despite the way her body shook. She lifted her hand, palm open. Peace, or surrender. Jonas's stomach tightened. Apache. He knew their look, their bearing. He had fought men from those bands in years past, skirmishes bloody enough to stain a lifetime. But these weren't warriors. They were women, half-frozen, barely upright. Turn back, he growled over the wind. Ain't nothing for you here. Still they stood. No plea crossed their lips, no words at all. He thought they might not even speak English. Then, as if to answer his doubt, one swayed on her feet, eyes rolling back and crumpled into snow. Jonas cursed low, his rifle lowered by instinct. Though his gut told him to slam the door, let the storm finish what life had started. He had lived 30 winters by trusting no one, 30 winters by staying hard. But as he stared at the woman lying in the snow, limbs twitching weakly, he felt the years pressing on him heavier than the storm itself. With a growl more at himself than at them, he strode forward, boots sinking deep. He slung his rifle over his back, bent down, and hauled the fallen woman into his arms. She was light, too light, bones sharp under ragged cloth. He turned without looking at the others and carried her into the cabin. The women followed, silent, like shadows slipping through the door. The cabin filled with the smell of snow and damp cloth, the crackle of fire, the harsh sound of many lungs drawing breath. Jonas laid the woman on his bunk, then stood, shoulders rigid. The other 5 clustered together near the wall, their eyes never leaving him. He jabbed a finger at them. Don't get comfortable. This ain't charity. She'll warm, then you move on. They gave no sign of understanding, though he suspected they grasped his meaning well enough. The leader's gaze was flint, unreadable. Jonas stoked the fire higher. The storm outside raged, beating at the roof. He looked at the woman on his bunk. Her lips were cracked, skin fever hot, under the grime. She needed food, water, care, things he had, but not in abundance. He turned away, jaw tight. The cabin felt smaller now, the air too, full of others. For 30 winters, no soul had crossed his threshold. Now 6 strangers sat under his roof, silent, watching. He poured water into a cup, pressed it to the lips of the woman on his bed. She swallowed weakly. The others murmured something in Apache, words he could not understand, but whose meaning he could feel, a mix of gratitude and fear. Jonas set the cup down hard on the table. One night, that's all. The leader stepped forward, slow, deliberate. She looked him in the eye, her face a map of weariness and will. She touched her chest lightly. Nalin. Her voice was low, hoarse. She pointed to each woman in turn, naming them in words he couldn't hold on to. Then she touched her chest again. Nalin. Jonas hesitated, then gave a grunt. Jonas. Her lips twitched, not a smile, but close to one. She stepped back. He sat at the table, poured himself a measure of whiskey, and drank. His hand trembled slightly, though from cold or anger he couldn't say. He stared at the fire, its flames leaping, shadows dancing across 6 gaunt faces. The storm howled, battering the cabin. But it was not the wind that gnawed at him. It was the knowledge that something had shifted. For 30 winters, he had kept the world outside. Now the world had walked in, barefoot and starving, and laid claim to his silence. Jonas Clay was a man who had lost everything. Yet, as he sat in the dim glow, 6 pairs of eyes watching him, he knew this night would not pass like the others. Something had begun, something he could not turn away from, and in the marrow of his bones he felt it. His long winter of solitude had ended. The storm raged for 3 days without pause, and in that time Jonas Clay learned more of the women than he ever wished to. The cabin, once his stronghold of silence, now swelled with the sounds of coughing, whispers in Apache, the shuffle of feet across his plank floor. The smell of wet hides and smoke thick in the air. For 30 winters he had moved like a wolf within these walls, each sound his own. Now he was surrounded by strangers, and every glance they cast was a reminder that he no longer lived alone. The one called Nalin proved herself the center of the others. She was not the oldest, but her bearing gave her authority. She rationed the firewood he stacked near the stove, ordered the others to patch gaps with hides, saw to the sick woman, her sister, perhaps, who lay fevered on Jonas's bunk. She watched Jonas with eyes sharp as obsidian, weighing him, never flinching. The others differed in age and strength. A girl barely grown, face gaunt and eyes too large, clung to Nalin like a shadow. Another, broad-shouldered and scarred along the jaw, carried herself like a fighter, hands never far from a knife at her waist. One woman limped, her ankle wrapped in dirty cloth, while another wore her hair shorn ragged, as if it had been cut in anger. They spoke little English, but enough passed in their expressions: fear, weariness, pride. Jonas tried to keep himself apart. He mended traps at his table, split wood outside between storms, stalked elk in the drifts when food thinned. Yet each time he returned, he found the women's presence carved deeper into his home. They repaired seams in his hides with needles of bone, scrubbed soot from his iron pot, strung herbs from rafters that filled the air with sharp, clean scents. His cabin was still his, but no longer the same. At night, when the wind moaned like the voice of his dead, he lay awake on a bedroll by the fire and listened. The women spoke, in hushed tones, their language a flow of music and stone. Sometimes he caught Nalin's voice alone, low and firm, soothing the younger ones. Once, faint laughter rippled through them, brittle but real, and Jonas felt something stir inside him like a limb long frozen. He turned his face to the wall and forced himself to sleep. By the second, weak the food ran thin. The rabbits he snared were stringy, the fox hide worthless to eat. His jars of beans shrank fast under 7 mouths. Jonas cursed his soft heart every time he saw the hunger in their eyes, yet he still strapped on his rifle and trudged into the woods. Nalin offered nothing but a steady nod when he returned with meat. She never thanked him, but she did not need to. He read gratitude in the way the girl gnawed a bone, in the faint color that returned to the sick one's cheeks. One morning, tracks in the snow led him to an elk herd grazing in a frozen meadow. He crouched behind spruce, breath smoking, rifle steady. Before he could fire, the broad-shouldered woman, her name he had learned was Tayada, slipped from the trees beside him. She carried a bough of ash, string taut, arrow ready. Jonas stiffened, but she only nodded once, eyes locked on the herd. Her arrow loosed at the same moment his rifle cracked. The elk bolted, snow spraying. When the smoke cleared, 2 bodies lay still. Together they dragged the kill back to the cabin. Jonas expected silence, but Tayada spoke in halting English. "Good hunt," she said. The words struck him harder than a bullet. He grunted the closest he came to agreement and shouldered more of the weight. That night the cabin rang with chewing, grease sizzling on the pan, sighs of relief. For the first time in memory, Jonas ate, surrounded by voices instead of shadows. He didn't know if he liked it, but he could not deny it eased the hollowness. As the days grew longer, small bonds formed. The girl, Tala, mimicked Jonas's words with shy determination, giggling when he corrected her. The limping woman, Asa, showed him how to weave strips of hide into snares tougher than wire. Even the shorn-haired one, Kaya, once glared at him like a cornered wolf, but softened enough to share dried herbs for his whiskey-stiff joints. Only Nalin kept herself distant, though her gaze followed him with the weight of unspoken judgment. Then trouble came, as it always did when men smelled weakness. Jonas had gone down to the frozen creek to chop ice for water when he saw smoke curling above the timberline. Not from his chimney, from beyond. His gut tightened. He hurried back, snow crunching underfoot. At the cabin, Nalin stood at the doorway, bow in hand. She had seen it too. Jonas pushed past her, set the bucket down hard. "Stay inside," he said. She didn't move. Hours later, 3 men rode out of the trees, ponies snorting steam, beards crusted with frost. Trappers by the look of them, mangy coats, eyes sharp with hunger for more than food. Jonas leaned against his fence, rifle in plain sight. Even in Mountain Man, the lead called. His grin showed black gaps. "Heard tell you had company up here." His eyes slid past Jonas toward the cabin door. 6 squaws, wasn't it? Jonas's blood ran cold. He hadn't spoken to another soul in months. How word traveled this fast, he couldn't guess. But trappers had their ways, and nothing stirred greed like vulnerable women. "Storm's hard," Jonas said flatly. "Ain't no company here but me." The man chuckled. "That's so. Shame then. Could have offered trade. Powder, whiskey, whatever you need." He leaned forward in his saddle, voice dropping. "But if you got best let us see. Wouldn't want anyone thinkin' you was hoggin' what ain't yours." The other two laughed low. Jonas's hand tightened on his rifle. Behind him, the door creaked. Nalin's eyes burned from the shadows. "You best ride on," Jonas said, voice like gravel. "Ain't nothin' for you here." The leader's grin soured. "Careful, old man. Place gets lonely up here. Maybe you forgot how to share." He spat in the snow, then tugged his reins. "We'll be back. Ain't no man keeps 6 women to himself without payin' for it." They turned, horses crunching away through the drifts. Jonas stood still until the trees swallowed them. Only then did he lower the rifle. His heart hammered in his chest. He turned to the cabin. Nalin stood framed by firelight, face hard. She stepped out, snow whipping around her. "They come back," she said slowly, words thick but clear. "We fight." Jonas studied her. She was right, of course, but the thought of blood on his doorstep, of enemies swarming the only shelter he had left, filled him with a rage he had buried for decades. He had left the world to escape its battles. Now battle had found him again. That night the cabin pulsed with tension. The women sharpened knives, checked bows, whispered plans. Jonas sat silent, whiskey untouched, staring into the fire. He wanted to drive them out, tell them their fight was not his. But each time he looked at Tala's small face, or Ace's limping step, or the hollow weariness in Kaya's eyes, the words withered in his throat. They had nowhere to go. And damned if he didn't feel the weight of responsibility pressing against the armor he'd built around himself. Before dawn, Jonas stepped outside. The snow had eased, leaving the world sharp and still. He looked at the mountains, his mountains, rising black against the stars. For 30 winters they had been his sanctuary. Now they were battlefield. He felt something stir inside him, the same fire that once carried him through war. A thing he thought dead. When he returned, Nalin was waiting. She studied his face, as if reading the decision carved there. He nodded once. Her lips tightened, not in triumph, but in grim understanding. "Good," she said. "We fight." And for the first time in 3 decades, Jonas Clay was no longer just a man hiding from the world. He was a man standing against it. The snow lay deep, hard-crusted from nights of bitter freeze, and the world outside Jonas Clay's cabin felt like a drum stretched tight, waiting for a strike. The women moved with quiet purpose in the dawn light, their breath rising in clouds, their eyes sharp with a knowledge Jonas recognized well. The knowledge that men would come to kill or take, and blood would answer blood. He had fought long ago in valleys thick with smoke and musket fire, had stood in lines where men dropped like wheat before the scythe, but he had not felt this kind of tension in 30 years. This was not an army's war. This was his home, his hearth, his strange new family, whether he had wanted one or not. Nalin watched him as he set the rifle on the table and ran his thumb along the oiled stock. She stood tall, hair braided, bow strung tight. In her face was resolve, not hope. Hope was for those who still believed life gave choices. Resolve belonged to those who had lost enough to know better. "They will come," she said, her English still halting but steady. Jonas nodded. "Aye, men like that don't let go." Tayada, broad-shouldered and grim, laid out a line of arrows she had fletched with raven feathers. Kaya checked the knives, steel glinting in firelight. Asa, limping but unbowed, tightened snares she had fashioned from cord and bone. Tala, the youngest, clutched a small hatchet with hands that trembled. Jonas crouched before her, his eyes softer than he knew they could be. "Don't swing unless you must," he told her. "And if you must, swing hard." She nodded, lips pressed tight, a child forced into womanhood by exile and fear. The storm had cleared in the night, leaving the land brittle and bright. Sunlight sparked off snowfields like shards of glass. Jonas stepped outside, the cold biting his scarred cheeks, and scanned the timberline. The mountains rose around them, solemn witnesses to what was coming. His cabin crouched in the hollow like an animal bracing for attack. He felt the old rhythm return, scout's rhythm, soldier's rhythm. Every sense stretched thin, every sound sharpened. The first sign came at mid-morning, crows lifting from the trees, wings beating in black unison. Then the creak of saddles, faint, measured. Jonas raised his hand. Silence fell in the cabin behind him. 3 riders appeared first, the same trappers as before, their horses blowing steam. Behind them came more, 5, 6, 7 in all. Rough men, faces hidden under beards and scars, guns slung loose. Their eyes found the cabin and lit like wolves spotting deer. Jonas stepped forward, rifle in plain sight. He could feel the women at his back, could almost hear the tension in their lungs. "Mountain man," the leader called, voice carrying across the snow. "Told you we'd be back." Jonas said nothing. He set his boots firm in the drift, rifle steady in his hands. "Don't be stubborn," the man went on. "Give us the women, and you keep your skin. We're fair men." He grinned, teeth yellow as old bone. "More and fair." A hot wind of memory rushed through Jonas, fields of dead, his wife's fevered hand slipping from his own, the endless winters of silence he thought he deserved. He had hidden long enough. "You want 'em," Jonas said, his voice gravel. "You'll pay in blood." The grin dropped. The leader's eyes narrowed. His hand twitched toward his revolver. The crack of Jonas's rifle split the air. The leader pitched backward from his saddle, blood spraying bright against snow. Chaos erupted. Shots roared, horses screamed. The cabin door burst wide as Nalin and the others unleashed arrows swift and sharp. One trapper tumbled into the drift, an arrow through his throat. Another staggered with Kaya's knife buried in his side. Jonas reloaded, fingers sure despite the pounding in his chest. A bullet hissed past his ear. He dropped to one knee, fired again, and saw a man spin and collapse. He rolled behind the woodpile as more shots tore splinters from logs. The women fought like spirits of the mountain. Tayada stood firm, loosing arrow after arrow, each one finding flesh. Asa limped through the drifts, setting snares that yanked a screaming man off his feet. Tala's hatchet flashed, clumsy but fierce, as she defended the sick woman inside. Nalin moved like fire, bow singing, her voice sharp with commands that needed no translation. Jonas rose, blood roaring in his ears. A trapper charged, pistol raised. Jonas swung his rifle like a club, wood cracking against the man's skull. He felt bone give, saw the body crumple. Another rushed him, knife drawn. Jonas met him with an axe blow that split his cry in half, snow spraying red. Pain seared his shoulder. He staggered, teeth clenched. A bullet had grazed him deep, hot blood soaking his coat. He pressed a hand to the wound, forced himself upright. He had no time to fall. The fight surged, then stilled. Only 2 trappers remained, faces pale, breath ragged. They glanced at each other, then turned their horses, fleeing into the timber. The sound of hooves faded into silence. Jonas stood in the churned snow, chest heaving. Around him lay the bodies of 7 men, the snow stained dark. The air reeked of gunpowder and blood. His shoulder burned, his muscles trembled, but he was alive. They all were. Nalin lowered her bow. Her gaze met his, steady, unreadable. Then she inclined her head once, a warrior's respect. Inside the cabin, Tala wept quietly, knife clutched in her small hand. Asa sank onto a stool, blood on her leg where a bullet had grazed. Kaya cleaned her blade with calm precision, though her hands shook faintly. Tayada sat by the fire, silent, her arrows spent. The sick woman, Luyu, whispered a prayer in her own tongue. Jonas lowered himself onto the bench, sweat cold on his brow. His shoulder throbbed, his body ached. But his spirit felt something it had not in years, a weight lifted. For decades he had told himself solitude was strength, that silence was his punishment and his shield. But as he looked at these women, broken, fierce, alive, he knew the truth. Strength was not hiding. Strength was standing. Strength was bleeding with others and not turning away. Nalin approached, bandages in her hands. Without a word, she tended his wound, her touch firm, careful. He winced, but did not pull back. Their eyes met again, and for a heartbeat there was understanding deeper than words. The cabin smelled of smoke and iron, a victory and loss. The snow outside lay churned with death, but inside warmth glowed. Jonas leaned back, weary, watching the women move about the room as though they had always belonged. He felt the walls expand, no longer a prison but a shelter. Night fell. The fire snapped, shadows dancing. Jonas closed his eyes, hearing not silence, but the murmur of voices, the rustle of life. For the first time in 30 winters, he did not feel alone. And when he opened his eyes again, he knew the mountains had changed him. No longer a man buried by grief, but a man bound by blood, by fight, by the fragile hope of a family born in the snow. The world would not let them rest. More men would come, or hunger, or the endless bite of the cold. But Jonas Clay no longer feared it. He had stood, and he would stand again. The narrator's voice lingered like the crackle of fire. The frontier was never kind. It stripped men to their bones, forced them to reckon with what they truly were. Jonas Clay had walked into the wilderness to die, and instead he had found life in 6 exiled women who refused to bow. Perhaps that was the lesson of the mountains, that strength was not the absence of others, but the courage to stand with them when the world pressed hardest. So, if you carry this tale with you, let it be this: solitude may keep a man alive, but it is not what makes him human. And when the snow lies heavy and the wolves circle close, sometimes shelter is not given. Sometimes it is shared.